I'm Timothy, the composer behind the music on this channel. While many of you are familiar with my arrangements, film scoring competition submissions, and cinematic music, that wasn't always what my music sounded like. Well, I've come a long way from taking an earbud and recording audio from a keyboard through that earbud right up to a phone. But it's been 10 years since those days, and to commemorate that, I wanted to take a look back at some of my work from then and take you along for the ride. So I think this might be a pretty amusing experience for myself and those of you watching. Wow. That takes me way back. Literally all the way back to the very beginning. That is what I considered the first composition of mine. Not because I hadn't done music before that. I had been doing a lot of theme creation and messing around with tunes and coming up with ideas and things like that. But prior to this, it had all been improvisatory. So I'd just been playing on the piano and then I would go on my merry way. This was the first time that I actually sat down and said, hey, I want to have my music in some kind of redistributable format to share with friends and family, or, let's be real, listen to myself when I not have to go to the piano, you know? So that's exactly what I did. Like I mentioned earlier, I had a keyboard. It had no velocity sensitivity and no way to output audio or MIDI to a computer. So I just took a pair of earbuds, and while I would listen to one of the earbuds while I was playing, the other one was just next to my phone's microphone, and that's how I captured the audio. And it's a very, very rudimentary way of recording, but for the time, it did what I needed it to do. It got the job done. It got me some recordings, and I was able to listen back to the different themes and other ideas that I'd been playing. And I ended up doing a whole bunch of these. This was just one of 50 that I ultimately ended up doing. And so if we take a look at the folder here, you'll see that these 50 tracks are divided into 5 different subcategories, or I guess you could call them almost like sub-albums. And that's because they correlate with 5 book ideas that I had at the time. So if I go back even further, originally I wanted to write books. And I had these 5 different ideas that you see here that I wanted to write. But the problem was I'm a really slow writer, like frustratingly slow. So I would try and write something, but I would get so bogged down in the details. I just couldn't write text to save my life. And so I started improvising on these different pieces because that was the only way I could get my creativity out into some kind of format that wasn't just stuck in my brain. And so that's what these 5 different titles are. So you'll see here there's The Olympians, and that was my superhero book. There is Olympians on Earth, which is a book about Greek mythology, but like real Greek mythology. Definitely not Percy Jackson ripoff. Then there's Algalarth, which is a totally made-up word. That's a book about these teenagers that go to another dimension, and they basically go on a Super Mario Bros. Style adventure to various biomes where they have to retrieve these MacGuffins for these overlords. So it's kind of a fun adventure book. Then there's the 26 dimensions, which is pretty self-explanatory. There are 26 dimensions, and these are humans in the future that travel to all of them and explore them. And then the last one here that you see is Strike Force 9, which is about aliens who come to Earth and invade it, and humans who jump into spaceships and fight back. So definitely tried and true right there. So yeah, so those are my 5 ideas that I spun off a bunch of these themes, sometimes for characters, sometimes for plot points. And if you just look at the list here, you'll see, which of these tend to fall on which side. So if we take a look at some of these, we can see what they sound like. You've already heard the Olympians theme. That was a superhero theme that a couple minutes ago that I played. And then you also heard Nocturnal Beast at the beginning of the video. That was that really weird, janky one that is really hard for me to listen to. So let's see if any of these other ones are kind of like that. So let's just listen to the Greek theme. Pretty fat synth. It's pretty bare bones. Yeah, not really a lot of rhythmic interest there, just the bass line going up and down. Suspense, it's rising. Love how the only idea I could have for an ending was to just slow it down and hold a note for a while. So yeah, so that was my Greek theme. What else do we have here? We have the Algalar theme. Let's see what that one sounds like. All right, so that one's immediately more major, a lot more upbeat. Yeah, the rhythmic interest and harmonic interest are much better than the previous one. Yeah, I'm liking the vibe of this one. A little bit of ominous accidentals in there. All right. Oh, final chord there. Very classic of me. All right, so that one, I guess, yeah, definitely a lot more major, a lot more going on just by nature of those extra rhythms in the left hand. So I like that one a lot more, and it's got that different tone to it to match the teenagers goofing around, which is a lighter tone of a story than the previous one. So, well, let's look now at the 26 dimensions theme, see what that one sounds like. This one's already a lot calmer. But it's also just arpeggiation. Yeah, so this one's a lot more similar to the Greek theme in that I basically found some kind of chord progression that I liked, and I just stuck with that for the whole piece. Ooh, some minor bit at the end there to make it a little ominous towards the end. But yeah, that one's definitely even more simplistic than the one we just heard. So, okay. And then here's the last one. The aliens versus spaceships theme. Oh yeah, I'm liking this one already. It's got a bit of bravado to it. A little more jaunty. Yeah, I could tell that I could hear in my head while I was writing this more than what I was able to play. There it is again. The slow down and play a chord at the end, and it. So as you can hear, all of those were pretty straightforward. There's nothing too crazy going on. Like I said, it's just two hands doing usually a tune and some kind of accompaniment underneath it. And that's that's how most of these pieces worked out. And really the only other thing that would be added would be some kind of percussion, just incidentally, because I'd be banging on the keys so hard, wishing that I could get more sound out of them. But then you would start hearing the clonking of the keys in the background. But yeah, so I mean, that's what I was working on to start off my composing journey. But I remember as I was wrapping up this project, I kept feeling like it would be nice to have a way to have these same pieces, but with less of the inconsistency of me playing them. Because, sometimes I'd make mistakes. Sometimes you'd hear like the distortion or static or, these other artifacts in the sound itself. And so I started looking for some kind of way to, make these more polished. And I started looking at some digital solutions. So what you just heard is what I came across. I came across MuseScore, which many of you will know is free notation software. And while it wasn't anything like what it is today, 10 years ago, it was, for me, the solution to how to digitize my music. So as a pianist, I was familiar with notation, hence me jumping into looking for some kind of digital software to do notation. And I had, before that point, not even known that was a thing. So imagine my excitement to find out that this is, in fact, a field, and there are many programs to try and figure out. So I went with MuseScore, and I was just delighted that I was able to, type in the notes that I wanted and press play, and boom, there's your music played perfectly right out of the get-go. And so you can see here on this screen, not counting the Best of TM, which is the album that I recorded, the Best of Timothy Makings, I called it. You'll see that I got into 3 albums with this new MuseScore software that I was using. So if you look at the Olympians, my superhero album, you can see that I expanded my track lineup from the 10 that there were in the original Timothy Makings to now 24, counting the quote-unquote trailer music that I came up with at the end. And that was because I wanted the goal for this round of my theme ideas and pieces to actually approach the length of a regular soundtrack album. And that being around an hour, I tried to write more pieces and have more details filling in the gaps between narrative points to get me over an hour. So you'll see here that the length is just over an hour. And what you just heard was, of course, the snippet of my superhero theme once more, now MuseScoreified. But yeah, I mean, so a lot of these, the ones that are the same names as before, I kept pretty close to what the original were. But some of them I changed because even a few months later, I already didn't like what I'd done. So for example, Nocturnal Beast, that one that I played at the beginning of this video, that was really weird. I mean, if I open it now, here's what that version sounded like. So you can hear, had nothing to do with the one that came before it. Because part of my strategy was to actually write pieces almost imagining scenes as if they were in a movie. So this one, it's much longer. You see it's like 4.5 minutes, almost 5. And it's because I'm trying to think of, well, where does this piece fall in the timeline of my book, and then what scene would actually accompany that would be the reason for it being there. So yeah, so I would go in and I would write these much longer, more detailed pieces. Side note, MuseScore gave me, of course, the ability to use more than 2 hands at once. So I went up to a whopping 3 staves, and that would give me the opportunity mostly to add rhythmic interest. So I would have a tune, some kind of bass line, and then I now had this third line where I could actually do rhythmic figures, arpeggios, whatever it was I needed to kind of fill in the piece to more of what I was imagining it to be. So it was a big deal for me to be able to actually start expanding from 2 sounds to 3. So that was the Olympian soundtrack. this was pretty productive time. I was basically writing a piece every week, to the point that I kind of made it my goal to write a piece every week. So that allowed me to get this album done pretty quickly, just a few months time, doing one a week. And then I did the same thing with Algalarth, my series about going to different biomes and picking up MacGuffins. And so for that one, once again, I was able to hit my hour mark. Looks like these 25 tracks are going to total just over an hour. And same thing. You can even see just by the titles that there's a little bit more of a narrative going on here. So let's see if we just take a look at the new Algalarth theme. This is what I came up with this time around. So here, I guess it's cool. I was able to use triplets. I don't believe I was very confident in actually utilizing those when playing in real time. But yeah, this one follows the contour of the original theme, more or less the same. So as you can see, still pretty simple, but it's clean. And that's what I was looking for at that time, was cleaner, polished music that didn't have human imperfections. So maybe I succeeded too well at being MIDI, but certainly at the time, that was exactly what I was looking for. Now, if I open the Strikeforce 9 folder, you'll see there's only 4 pieces here. And that's because I just started getting burned out. I was, I guess, holding myself to a bit too high of a standard to try and pump out a piece every single week. And when I started falling behind, I also started losing motivation to keep going. So I only ended up doing the first few of these, and then I just kind of dropped off. Plus, I started thinking that it might be time to look into expanding my instrumentation. Because again, I started with 2 hands, and then in this one I added a third one. But I'd always thought it would be cool to write for orchestra, even if I didn't know how to do that. And so kind of the next step that both burnout and then this interest got me to was, how about I look into ways to actually build up to an orchestra? And so I started adding instruments to my pieces as I remade them. All right, so I guess I should have given the disclaimer. It took me a few years to get there, right? When I first started adding instruments, I basically was just adding the things that I thought sounded good. So I would add strings or brass or percussion or some other instruments, random ones here and there, just whatever I thought sounded good. And that was because when I first tried to add instruments and try and build up to an orchestra, I lacked the knowledge of both conventions of orchestra writing and breaking conventions in orchestral writing. And so the result was me just kind of naively pressing forward, and frankly, the result is that it just was unrealistic, right? There are some genres of music that you can just write what sounds good, especially electronic music, but if you're trying to write for acoustic instruments, to make it actually sound like acoustic instruments, you have to know how they work. And I didn't know that until I read an orchestration book in high school that talked about that, and talked about, not only do you need to know the technical aspects, like here's what it sounds like in this register, here's how high or how low this instrument can play, but you also need to know how the instrument works with other instruments. And reading that book really unlocked that whole concept to me that I hadn't thought of previously. And it also gave me confidence to finally open up one of the orchestral templates in MuseScore and try and write pieces from the standpoint of an orchestra, rather than just adding what I thought that I wanted. And so that ended up being a pivotal turning point in my aspirations of writing orchestral music. Hopefully you can hear the improvement in my writing as a whole there, going from the mismatch of instruments that was before to more clear sectional writing where each instrument is there and written with purpose, especially in this case, the string section, which you would think would be pretty important for writing for orchestra, right? So over the next couple of years, whenever I felt like I made a significant improvement to my writing in general, or to the playback functionality of the software that I was using, I would sit down and I would remake my theme pieces. And I didn't do whole albums anymore because at that point I had learned that I just would get too burned out if I tried to undergo that large of a project. And so, like I said, I would just sit down, I took the theme ideas from each of my books, and then I would just remake those. And at this point, there were 7 books, and so I felt like it was actually enough that I could put them all into one album. So I started putting them together into this album, which I called Nova Music, which means new music. That last, and actually most recent iteration of my superhero theme was written 2 weeks before I went to college, and with that major life change also came major changes to my composition habits. So, prior to college, I had written plenty of music outside of my book ideas, but the focus had still always been on that recurring cycle of remaking those theme pieces whenever I felt like I had improved in some way. But that changed in college. It kind of fell off because in college, with college life and also the studies that I was doing, especially with new music and looking at music history, that's kinds of things they tend to put, other ideas in one's head. And like in my case, I just would have other ideas. So when I did improve my skills or my playback capacities, I would use whatever ideas had been kind of turning around in my head in those times to test out these new, pieces of knowledge that I had. And so for a couple of years, I didn't do anything with my book ideas. They just sat away in the back of my brain, and I only had that superhero theme from 2018 to go off of as far as this kind of new era. But like I said, they were in the back of my brain. I never really forgot about them, and the further away I got from the last Nova Music version I did, the more I started to really want to go back to them and kind of bring them into this modern age of my composing era, I guess you could say. And so starting my junior year, I started making plans to do a new album that would consolidate these different book ideas into these suites that would have all of the most major and important themes that I'd come up with for them over the years. And I made plans to actually start writing that in the last semester of my senior year, thinking that I would have more free time with fewer commitments, but could not have been more wrong because my senior recital ended up being an absolute logistical monster, and that just totally ate up all my time. So rather than getting that album worked on in the spring of 2022, I just had to shelve it in the hopes that once I graduated, I might have more time to start working on it. And luckily, in that case, I was right. And once I graduated, I had a lot more free time. And so over the last year or so, I've spent a lot of time rebuilding my orchestral template to the most realistic and detailed version to date that would allow me to do specific soundscapes while also keeping the orchestra at arm's length. And so then now I'm excited to announce that after months and months of preparation, this new album is actually well underway, and I'm looking to release it towards the end of the year. It'll be called Septemundos, which means 7 worlds, based on the 7 book ideas from my childhood. And like I said, they'll each be this long orchestral suite containing several of the themes that I feel like are most important. But the goal will be an overall cohesive narrative for each one that allows me to finally tell these stories that I've had in my head and have remained in my head even through all these iterations of theme pieces, because even those were just a bit too splintered to really tell a full story. So, like I said, hoping to get that out by the end of the year, so be on the lookout for some hints being dropped as to when that'll come out. And I really hope that those of you who subscribed over the last few years will take a look at those videos once they come out. Thank you for tuning in to this deep dive into my dark compositional past, although it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. In fact, it was pretty entertaining to go back to the days of earbuds and phones and random music being thrown into tracks with tons of distortion. So, in that retrospect, it's kind of worth it, at least for me. So I hope that you got some enjoyment out of it as well, or at the very least, you learned that we all start somewhere, and no one's going to be a pro at their first go around of doing things. So I'm going to go back to writing my album now, but until the next video, have a good one.